this bookmarks keeper is not done yet. Instead of having a link to some interesting content, right now it just stores numbers. But this is a good example when you're learning technology for the first time to not make things too complicated. So yeah, it's not pretty and it's pretty boring, but it will simplify a lot of the wiring necessary to get from Java to your front end. So your pages will actually be a whole lot prettier when they're done. This one's bare bones and simple, so that all you see is the basics of getting data back and forth. So for this one, we can say 4 and 4 appears. If we refresh the page, it's still there. Somebody else adding one too?
Oh,
cool.
Sorry.
No, cool. That's awesome. That's actually a great part to the demo. Anybody else want to add one in there? It doesn't have to be a number. It can be anything else. Let's add some more stuff. Anybody want to add one? There we go. The best number there is. Yeah, and so this is, you'll see in a minute, so this is all running from one little static arrayless string running on this Java application, but all of you out there on the web can interact with it. So we have a total of like 30 lines of Java code, and everyone in this room can add stuff to it. So, man, that was even better. Okay, so how do we build this? So this project is here at Java Projects Bookshelf. And afterwards, you can download the code and run it if you want. And in the commit history, we have a couple of different revisions, I think 5 steps that it took to get to here. I'm going to go back to this revision, and that's the simplest one before any of this bookmarks keeper was added. So this is just a little bit of git foo, don't worry about it. I'm going to rewind this project back in time. Nope, that's not right. Rewind the project back in time to an older version. You can see the last, so now it's pretending the last commit was on July 17th. Same thing if I look over here, there's a lot of stuff going on. Hopefully no profanity in there. So we are currently on this revision, which goes back a couple of days. All right, so let's run this one so you can get a sense of what we're starting with. There we go. When in doubt, Maven clean. Fixes all kinds of problems. Okay, so this is our page that we saw in week 1. And if we were to go to the bookmarks URL, nothing happens. Like this one, this is what we're going for. So before we get into the new stuff, we'll do a quick review of adding controllers. So to add a Spring MVC controller, we'll add a class called Marks Controller TL. And make it a controller, and we'll give it a request mapping of bookmarks. And we'll add the very simplest controller that we can make. And that's to say response body. So we can check in small little bits to make sure that nothing else is going wrong. And we've added a controller to send some data forward. So the next thing we want to do is have this load basic HTML page. One bookmarks, and to save time I'm going to copy some code from earlier revision. This out for now. Oh. And I'm going to replace this with bookmarks .html, and I'm going to remove the response body tag so that instead of printing the string bookmarks.html, Spring MVC will go and look up the page. Let's double check what's wrong. Bookmarks and nothing.
Should it be a string, or should it be, what do we call that, a model? Or
For these, it's a string.
I don't know if it makes a difference, but when I put a space, I had the same issue, but when I put a space between my quotation marks,
These?
I don't know. That's just what I tried and
It loaded. Let's explore that mystery offline, and we'll go ahead and move it over to templates so that we can get to the good stuff tonight. Okay, so for now I'm going to go ahead and move that over to templates, where we'll call it bookmarks. Then to have templates work, this is the first place where we will use Thymeleaf. Okay, and we're back. So a couple of things are needing some polish, but we were able to render the page. So by taking the HTML off of the Java code, or off of the return string, it's saying to look up and name bookmarks. So it will start in templates. You can have folders under there, so you could have bookmark/index. Those would appear here. And so it's going to start looking under that folder. Now, we have some work to do to finish off this artfully interesting web page. For one thing, it's expecting a number of bookmarks and nothing showed up. And, well, yeah, something did go wrong where it was unable to load the bookmarks. That's actually kind of correct. Let's see if we can fill this out and have it look more like our goal. So, we're going here. Oh, that's what happened. Let's keep this off for now. All right. So this one is going to expect a variable that shows the number of bookmarks. And this is an example in Thymeleaf of where the data will actually show up here when everything is rendered. But when the page is loading, when Spring is loading the page, it will evaluate this expression to figure out what that means. The same thing is happening here with this for loop to assemble this piece by piece. So we have an unordered list, and we have list items. And the bookmark goes here. So one of the first things we want to do is, well, actually we need some data. We need to send some data forward too. So let's do that, and then we'll leave this for later. So let's start by just having it return a count of how many bookmarks are in the system. So going back to our controller, we're going to tell this page that we want to load a model. And IntelliJ is helpful, and it's going to give us the name of it and automatically import it for us. So we're going to tell the model to add an attribute called count. And while this is loading, let's add a little bit of Java code. So a string is the simplest data structure that we can use. You can definitely get more elaborate with that. And we'll add a constructor that will, when the application starts, this will add the first one. So earlier we had the count 42 showing up. So how did this get here? When we had count listed as a model attribute, Thymeleaf is able to resolve that expression inside any of these th tags. This is also made possible, don't forget that you do need to have the XML namespace declared at the top. So count goes here, was replaced by 42. So back to our bookmarks list, can also add model and you can add that of any kind you want. And so if we look at the signature of add attribute, it says object. Everything in Java is an object. So it can be a string, it can be a number, it can be a list. This is the flexibility that lets you put any data type you want as a model attribute. So now let's make an update. Instead of count, let's try bookmarks.size. So we haven't, and this one, what appears in yellow will always be, inside the curly braces, will be valid Java code. So let's try it and see if this does what we want it to do.
What did you say? I'm sorry, it would be valid what?
Java.
Oh.
So yeah. So Java's the language you're going for there. And we have number of bookmarks in the system, 1. So inside this tag, as long as it's using an attribute that was pushed to the model and it's valid Java code, you can put whatever you want in there, such as a lie. So next we want to do an unordered list so that we can demonstrate how to loop through a list object and show that. So you may want to build tables, you may want to build a summary of many things, and it's common to send collections to your page. So the first part to that is our Thymeleaf alias and the command each to indicate that it's a loop. So that indicates that this line right here, we want to repeat it. So this line will be repeated. I'm going to write this a little bit backwards. This will be repeated for each entry in bookmarks. And when doing so, give each one the name bookmark. So it's a for loop, just in a really funny syntax. And if I stop there, you know what, this is not too interesting. Let's get this. Let's do this again. So we got the right number of list items. We don't have any text, but it's looping through that twice. To get the right text, we add a second tag. Nope, outside the quotes. So first thing we did was make a loop. We want to loop that line item, list item. The second thing we want to do is decorate it with text. So we're going to do 2 things to that. We're going to repeat it, and we're going to give it some text. And now we're using bookmark. Bookmark is not an entry that appeared in the original model. So bookmark does not come from Java. We could call it VM. It was created right here. So it looks a whole lot like things that were added to the model by the Java code. But these were added temporarily just for the purpose of this for loop. So this can be a little confusing because you have the curly braces and the $sign, and they look the same. The for loop temporarily added the variable VM to the model, and it'll only exist during that for loop. Kind of like when you create a for loop and you create a variable I, it makes sense inside the curly braces, and once the curly braces are done, it goes away. Same thing is going on here. So this is a string. And so now we got our text. So the last thing I want to show you before we switch over to JSP is how you can expand this to use your own types of classes. Something a little more interesting than a string. So we're going to create a package called model and an object called bookmark. And I'm lazy. Okay, so this has one property to it. You can add other properties to it as well. Could add web address. Now we can come back over to our bookmarks controller. Now we'll make this So IntelliJ added the import for us. We didn't see it happen, but it added it. And so now we can switch this list over to being an array of bookmarks. Now something awful is going to happen the first time we run this. That is not what we want. Yeah, the toString method does not exist on our class. So we're getting the default toString, which is to say where in memory this object exists. This is not what we're going for. Come back over to our view, and instead, I call it title. Yeah. We're going to use bookmark.title. That's better. So the last thing that we can do is we can create a form. You know what? Let's put it together piece by piece. Where the action is to go to a new controller method, bookmarks new. And the method, we'll get to the get and post methods a little bit later. The method equals post. And to that we'll add a text field called bookmark title and a button type submit makes it a button, and value puts a name on there, and this title. So type submit makes it a button, and value adds text to the button so that we can see what it says. So we're going to press this button, and then something awful is going to happen. This is a thing. Like, it's a series of something awful's happening that we got to fix one at a time. So now we have our basic form. And if we go in here, we can see that the form actually covers this whole area here. Only parts of it are visible. So this form is actually taking up the whole page. Something to keep in mind when you're doing layouts, you can come into inspect element, inspect an elements, and you can get a sense of how much space something is actually taking up, especially if it's text and you can't tell. And while we're in here, we can also see that all the Thymeleaf has disappeared from our list items. And we have a 2 here, but all the Thymeleaf is gone, and if we come up to HTML language equals English, our Thymeleaf aliases are gone there too. So they only need them when the page is loading, and then they load the page, they create it, and then they're gone. Some other things that are gone. Between the list items, we now see first one, uno mas, and the number 2. So these are gone, so these were replaced. So this is a tip that you can use if you're doing things with Thymeleaf and you're trying to remember where things are actually going to go. Once Thymeleaf evaluates this attribute, that's where it'll put it. So you can leave some notes to yourself. So the source code and the rendered code are always going to look a little bit different. So back to our something awful. I promised something awful. Something awful.
Oh no.
Raise your hand if you've seen this page a lot. Yeah, super not helpful. Something went wrong. In fact, 404, something was not found. In an upcoming workshop, we can talk about how to get a little bit clearer of an error page, custom error page, so we can get a little more detail out of this. For today, we're going to cheat because we know what's missing. Bookmarks new doesn't exist. So we need one more request mapping. Bookmarks new. And we're going to add request param, string called bookmark title. So it gets the name from the name of the form. And this goes beyond Thymeleaf, this goes beyond Spring MVC, this goes all the way back 10, maybe 20, 30 years to how HTTP servlets have always been in Java. So when you have a form that has, when you're posting from a form, it will take every input of type text and it will turn that into a request parameter and send it where it's going. And it uses the name of those text fields or any input field to know what to call it. So if you ever find yourself, you're not working in Thymeleaf, you're not working in Spring MVC, you're working in bare Java, HTTP servlets, it's the same thing. So the input was named book title. So we can assume that it's just going to be here. And then a little bit of Java. Add new bookmark. And the last thing we want to do is redirect. So this is a little bit of magic. We're going to redirect to what looks like nowhere, but it's actually a local nowhere. It's the bookmarks nowhere. So you could say index.html and have it send it back to the beginning. We just want to send it back to right here to load the bookmarks again. And add some debug statements to prove to ourselves that it's doing what we want it to do. Or if it isn't, more likely that it isn't. Okay. And now it's loaded. And since we had some print statements, we can check in the log, and let's make that a little bigger. We have a little bit of evidence of what happened in and when. So if I load this page a bunch of times, it's going to reload them every time. Print line, the first thing you learn in Java, it is so your friend when you're debugging. System.out.println, putting stuff in the logs, figuring out, checking your assumptions. Is this code doing what I think I'm doing? This is really useful in getting evidence to figure out what's actually happening and getting you towards what you want to happen. So, cheese. Cheese MVC. So now we've got the same thing. So that was our just under our half. We can actually create an update in about half an hour coding. So now we're going to switch over to just doing the same thing with Java server pages. And some of this will make a little more sense when we're done. When there's a table in here in this doc about to kind of help you decide which way that you want to go with this. So you can build your pages with Thymeleaf, or you can build them with JSPs. Both of them play really nicely with Spring's model. Or if you weren't doing that, which underneath the scenes is really HTTP servlet request. So both of them have a really natural binding. A lot of it kind of comes to where you'd want to go to look for examples. JSPs have been around for decades, so there's lots of examples out there on the web. And they're inside of projects that you've never seen before, and they're run in a way you've never run them before. But there's a big library of changes out there, so it's got a long history. Thymeleaf is a little newer, but you do have the added benefit of your backend Java classes from Launch Code have some examples of how to do some powerful things, and a lot of local people that know how to make things happen with Thymeleaf. So both have examples of how to get things done in different ways. I'm going to come back to these after I show you how to do the same thing with JSP. And then you can make up your own mind which way you want to go.
Do you have preference, or do you use one as opposed to use them both?
Do I have a... Right now I work faster in JSPs because I've been doing those for a while. And I have a lot of reference pages set up for when I want to do something. I know where to go to find it. There are some limitations to JSPs in Spring Boot. I don't know that we're going to encounter them in this project. The one thing I added in here is where it's likely to be used. For a lot of employers, a lot of shops that like to be on the edge of things, they want to do the new shiny, you're probably more likely to see Thymeleaf. You're also going to see React, you're going to see Angular, you're going to see people wanting to use the new way of doing model bindings, a new way of doing web presentation. If you're working at a larger company that has some systems that have been around for a while, that have a lot of examples and a lot of history in the way they do things, you're more likely to see JSP. Right now, you're probably more likely in the wild to encounter people that know how to use JSPs than Thymeleaf because it's new. So it kind of just goes on whether you want to have tradition or whether you want to have the new shiny. But to get JSP working, and this is the part that caused a lot of profanity the first time I did it, we have to do our least favorite thing, and that is project configuration. It's just not fun. We'd rather write code, but it has to be done. So the first thing, you guys have seen some Gradle before. Maven's pretty new, yeah?
Yeah.
And so I kind of breezed over this before, where I just added this dependency to pom.xml. There's a comparable file in Gradle, but the concept is the same, and they're actually pulling files from the same place. So group identifies the organization that published this bundle of Java code, and artifact ID is the name. So to use Java server pages, we're going to need to pull a few more. And we'll talk through what they do. So the first one is the Java standard template library. This one contains the Java code that knows how to turn HTML markup into if statements, for loops. This is going to be your Java-like expressions in your HTML page, so standard template library. Tomcat does a lot of things. It's a web container that manages a lot of the bindings from web URLs and where your process is running and connecting that to your Java code. One of the big things that it needs to do for JSPs is this is the part that knows where in your project source code to look to find web app resources. It does a lot of other things too. And then with that is Tomcat Jasper, and that manages a lot of the dialect and looking things up between translating web requests to knowing what data to send to the JSP page. And the great thing about these dependencies, we'll see the Java standard template library in action. These two, for the most part, we don't have to tinker with them. We set them up and they're running, and they connect the resources so that we just know that they connect and we can focus on writing source code. Yeah. This is where I say, how do these work? Very well. If you have to know how these work, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong. And so IntelliJ is telling us to import these changes, and they will appear. There's Jasper. Spring Framework boot. There's starter Tomcat. And Java Servlet, there's Java Servlet. So if we drill into these, which we won't, these have been downloaded to your computer. They will, Java will run them when your project starts. We don't need to worry about the source code for these. If you wanted to look at the relationship between Maven and source code, I would not recommend these to start with. I would actually recommend ones where there's Java classes that you want to interact with. So for now, all we need to do is know that adding these to our POM file will go out, download these resources, and add them to our project so that they are there when we run it. And there are ways that your project can run both Thymeleaf and JSPs, but that gets into view resolvers, and that's a layer of complicated that we don't want to get into tonight. So I'm going to disable this one for now. So I'm going to break everything we just spent a half an hour doing so that we can do it again in a different way. There are ways to get them to do both, but rather than introducing all that complexity, we're going to save that for later. So that's one. There's actually 5 configuration changes we have to make. The second one is to create folders in a very important, very particular place so that Tomcat knows where to find them. And there's a many decades old convention that web resources live in source main web app. So you have source main Java, source main resources, source main web app. That goes way before there was ever a Spring MVC. That's always been around. Let's make sure I put this, I did put it in the wrong spot. There we go. Now it's in the right spot. The second part of that convention that's been around a really long time is web-inf. So the idea of putting resources, static, and templates, that's a little bit newer. Putting things in web-inf is the more historically common place to find web resources. It used to be everything was in there. And from here we have full control. We're going to call this one a folder with JSPs, because that makes sense. We're going to know where to find them. And we'll create the first one. So we've got a file, an empty file, and to start out with, we're going to copy all of the code that we wrote in Thymeleaf. And we're going to do it again.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So you said, I just want to make sure I heard this because there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
The web-inf and the web-actor, like, are instead of the templates and the static?
Yeah.
Okay, and the JSP is like instead of the HTML pages, or is that?
Yeah.
It won't, both folders can be there.
Okay.
If your template folder is there, it's not going to harm anything. Mostly because we disabled Thymeleaf. It won't harm anything for those folders to be there. But these, if you want to do JSP, these two folders are non-negotiable.
Okay.
They have to be there. They have to be in source main web app, webinf. They have to be there. It is the only place Tomcat will look for them. If you're, that's where they live.
Okay.
Yeah, but it won't harm anything to have a templates folder in place.
Okay, since we disabled the template.
Yeah, yeah.
And Thymeleaf is valid HTML, so you could open up that file directly into Chrome. Like none of the Thymeleaf stuff would evaluate because you know it's not being processed by like the web servlet container like Tomcat. But I mean you could open it up. That's like one of the selling points of Thymeleaf, I guess, is that you could just modify it in a standard browser.
And you can't do that with the JSP?
Right.
Right. Yeah. So this looks a little ugly. IntelliJ opened the Thymeleaf template for us. It's a good pro and con. If we try to do the same, this is not what we're going for. Not exactly what we wanted. So yeah, that is a good pro for Thymeleaf. So I'm going to take out that namespace, the Thymeleaf namespace that we're not using. Going to leave our form. Delete this comment. I'm going to take these. You know, they'll be broken, but we'll leave them in. Yeah, so we'll leave them in for now. Now that I've taken the Thymeleaf template out of here, so the th name alias is gone. So these don't mean anything anymore. This is step one. We wanted this to happen. So these don't do anything. But we'll now go through what the replacement looks like with JSPs. Okay, so that's step two, creating folders. We still have 3 more steps of configuration to do. Luckily, the third one is quick. The third one is to tell Spring MVC where to look for views. The default is to look in static and templates. Spring MVC knows about those. We need to remind it to go look in WebIMF. So web app was already there. We knew that. So we don't include web app in the prefix of where to find it. We start with WebINF and JSP. So web app is not included. And then we're going to include any file with .jsp can be considered a view. So when we have our data in Java, we're going to name a view, and Spring MVC is going to say, okay, I'm going to go look in this folder for files named .jsp, and I know that those are views. Okay, so 2 more steps, and then we get to write code. Spring Boot initializer. So we'll get into Spring Boot theory at another time. The Spring Boot initializer is so that this bookshelf application class is going to be out on the demo code. That's this repository. And for today, we're not going to talk about why this works, but we're going to use it. So the servlet initializer tells Spring Boot to connect all these dots together. Go looking for view resolvers. Go looking for some of these pieces, bringing it together. So we need to extend. Going to our bookshelf application. This is now using inheritance. And it is a servlet initializer. I would add, if you're deciding whether or not you want to go with Thymeleaf or JSP, putting this here won't harm anything. Your Thymeleaf templates will still work, even if your application is a servlet initializer. And then this application sources. And then part of the purpose of this is to say that there are additional application sources to go find. And you can find them by looking at application properties. We can dig into more of the theory of Spring MVC offline. Or you can just copy this method and it'll do what you want it to do. All right, last step of configuration, and we will finally be ready to run some code. Okay, so the bad news is that this button no longer works. Yeah. However, there's a command that does the same thing. And let's go to our terminal. It's got pretty colors. Not a lot of colors that time. Oh, because it failed. Oh, because I'm running. So we probably address already in use. Anybody seen this before? Address already in use? Very common error. It means you already have something running on port 8080. So go stop it. You can only have one thing running at a time. So let's try it again. And let's see if I'm rewarded with all the pretty colors that I'm hoping for. Yay, pretty colors. So this actually looks a lot like what you saw when you ran it over here. Things are restarting. Live reload is coming up. We have our port listed. We say that we started bookshelf application. It's the same stuff. So we got to run command line. So we don't have our green button anymore, but it is the same process. So now that it's running, we don't really have it doing anything yet. We've disabled Thymeleaf, so we're back to this error that we see all the time. This one's actually kind of useful. It's saying that it's looking for WebINF JSP bookmarks JSP. So why is it looking there? We started with bookmarks. So let's visit that controller. So it came into here and it said, return bookmarks. And didn't find it. Why didn't it find it? Because one was called bookmark and one was called bookmarks. I don't know which one I do more often, forgetting the S or something where there's a different capitalization. So I'm going to kill this process and restart it. And we're back. So this one is now reading from the JSP page. And if we wanted to prove it to ourselves, we can come over to bookmarks.jsp and add some enthusiasm. So we know it's using the new page. And so most of this work, but we're back to we don't know how to get count to show up, and we don't know how to get that loop to happen, and we don't know how to bind our model attributes to our JSP view. So the answer, in this case, is to delete code. And I'm going to consult this. This does not need to be in quotes. Okay, let's try it again. So this is one of the syntax differences between Thymeleaf and JSP, is that JSPs will replace the markup with text exactly where they landed. So they're always in the same place. So we don't need to do the whole count goes here thing like we did in this one, where we had data between the span here. We could bring this span back. So the markup is in that tag, and that's exactly where the text will go. Now, how do we do a for loop? There we go. Source, main, web app, WebINF JSP. So we're going to use a different alias for comparison. For Thymeleaf, we added a namespace to the HTML tag. For JSP, it goes before that. So with taglibs, this is the Java standard template library. We imported that in our POM file. So we're going to import from this resource, and we're going to give it the prefix C. I don't know why C, probably C for core. You can call it anything you want. You can call it frogs. C is universally known to be an alias for Java standard template library. So that's one you can use. So now we're going to change our for loop. So we have our unordered list. And we're going to use a C each. Nope. C for each. The for each tag, C being the alias of that resource that we just requested. And just like Java, just like Thymeleaf, you have two parts. What is the thing that I'm looping over? And what do I call each variable when we get there? So our list is called bookmarks. And our temporary variable, when we're just looping over that one, here we called it VM. Let's call it the same thing here. So for each item in bookmark, name the variable VM and do everything until you see the closing tag. So now everything between these works like a for loop, and your variable BM is available to the model until the end of that for loop. So you can think of these tags as like your curly braces for loops. So BM will exist until that loop is over. So then we can take this expression get rid of all these Thymeleaf tags that aren't really working for us anymore. Restart. And we're back. So a couple of things that you'll want to notice while we're here in the source code. This page is super consistent. Here we have the model attribute bookmarks. It is not inside of quotes. Here we have the model attribute bookmark. It is inside of quotes. And here we have a temporary attribute, not in quotes. And here it's in quotes again. What is going on? This is not consistent. The rule being, these expressions are in bare HTML, no quotes. When you're naming a variable inside a command for the standard template library, you do use quotes. So when you see the letter C, use quotes. When you're doing plain old HTML, no quotes. Super clear, right? Makes a ton of sense. So what else can we do with this? So this is a problem that listed before, and so no, nothing has changed in the controller here. So this is all the same controller code. Everything we changed was on the view. And that was part of the point and part of the design of Spring MVC, was that controllers do what they do best. Get data, evaluate, send it back out. Your controllers should know very, very little about how the data is going to get displayed. So little, in fact, that we just had 2 different approaches to a view with the exact same controller, and we didn't have to change a thing. So let's change something. What happens if I accidentally misspell bookmarks, or call it bookmark? That's actually more likely. And now our view is expecting a model attribute called bookmarks to be there, and it's not going to be there. Something terrible is going to happen. No error. It just kind of silently didn't work. And now we get to figure out why. This is not so great. Things just disappeared. You worked really, really hard to create that code, and now just nothing's showing up. It just kind of quietly failed. So a good practice is to fail loudly, not so quietly. So this is the Thymeleaf version of it. I'm going to leave that alone for now. In JSP, we can say if, close that if, test. So test equals some Boolean expression, do what's inside here. And like any other if statement, if that Boolean expression is false, it will skip right over it. So we want to know if bookmarks is null. And so that's what we do in Java code, but because we're requesting data from the view, we need to add markup, and I think that's wrong. Nope, not wrong. So we do have quotes. That's what's wrong. This whole expression goes inside there. So when you're dealing with the standard template library, so things that start with C, everything inside the quotes is Java. So, or the quote curly braces, rather, is Java. So we saw things like bookmark, bookmarks.size. So all of these are your familiar Java syntax inside of the curly braces. So the curly braces are there to bridge the 2 languages together. And because we are using a standard template library tag, we need quotes. So if we didn't want to do that, we could say, is bookmarks null? We could do this. And that's valid JSP. It's going to, it's going to evaluate that. Let's find out. Yeah, bookmarks is null. Why is bookmarks null? Because I spelled it wrong. So we took some plain old Java code and just put it right there in the HTML. So no JSTL tag, just right there by itself. We just dropped some Java right there in the middle of our HTML file. And the reason we were able to do that is because that Java code was inside the $curly braces. So now that we have this test, and that's a good way to test it too. So if these expressions aren't working, you can just take that out of the quotes, copy it there, have it show up on the page. And that's a really good debugging technique, is just print it to the page and figure out what's going on. So it's true. Cool. That means we got our expression right. We're going to add a nice message that says something went wrong. So that's a little bit better. At least now we're not failing so quietly. So we've checked, we've made some assumptions. And this is a good debugging technique. So we can check to make sure our model attributes got where they were going. Because when you're breaking these models for the first time, that will be a big subject of doubt. Did I actually set these bindings correctly? Did I use the model correctly? I don't know. So a really simple thing you can do is just start printing them to the screen, and then you can find out if they actually got there. And then from there you can go on to bigger and more elaborate problems. But doing this, you can actually just check your assumptions about how you thought the model worked to see if the data actually made it in there like you hoped it did. So we're going to go back and reload this one more time. And it's working again. So while this is stopped, I'm going to save all this code that we just made and switch back to a version where we can compare these two approaches. So here was our original bookmarks HTML. Here's our JSP file. IntelliJ has this compare files feature built in, so you can pick any two and compare them side by side. In text, that's probably, well, it could be smaller. And this may be useful in deciding which way you want to go, which one you want to go with. You can kind of see, as you're reading through these two options, which one makes more sense to you. Do you like being able to load your Thymeleaf templates in the browser where you can see them and debug them? Or do you like the simplicity of looking at the JSP files? So one more time on compare. That was clicking that one. Nope, not control click. Command click on a Mac. Forget what it is on Windows, and compare files. So all of this code is on GitHub at Java Projects Bookshelf. And it's sort of split up over this last one includes the 5 steps to set up a project for JSP and how to get that first page in there. So everything we talked about with, we actually even don't need those 2 steps. So disable Thymeleaf if you're going to do that, adding those 3 resources, make this a Spring Boot initializer. For this case, I added a whole second controller so that I could switch between the 2, but you don't actually have to do that. The application properties and your JSP file. So this commit, which I called bookmark basic CRUD using JSPs, will summarize all those steps for switching your project over, because we all love configuring our projects. It's so much fun when we'd rather be, writing code. So back to which ones are right for you. So your green button's gone if you're doing JSPs. I'm not sure if live reload is an option. There's probably a way to get it to work. So if you make changes to your Thymeleaf template, you don't have to restart the server. There definitely is a way to get that to work in Thymeleaf. I'm not sure about JSPs. You have to kill it and start over. So that is can load check the style. Can't. So, disadvantage. So we talked about where it's popular. And then we saw this one. So the source versus rendered dialect, where your markup appears in the source code. So back to our comparison. So if you want to see, if you want an expression that will replace, when evaluated, will replace this. Or JSPs, things are rendered exactly where you put them. So if you set them there, that's where it renders. Single comment. Rendered in place. Yeah, and then if you're doing an if statement, so this is kind of like our Java style enclosure of we started and ended a loop, and then we did stuff inside of that. We started and ended an if condition and ended things inside of that. You can do the same thing in Thymeleaf, but instead of if, you have unless. There's a th if and a th unless. They're the opposites of each other. So it takes a little getting used to the dialect. So you can do all the same things, but they're called something different. So those are the two options to choose from. And let's see if we can get a little bit of a Java JSP change to happen. So you can get a sense of how smooth it actually is to develop something that's not rehearsed. So working with our JSP file, let's go back to previous version.
So I'm like following, but I'm also feeling a little, there's a lot happening.
Yeah.
Is that?
That's why this one's recorded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, pause this one, run the code, kind of code along to the recording. It takes a few times for it to stick. I also copy and pasted a lot of stuff here,
Okay.
so a lot of code just magically appeared instead of being typed out.
If
So
only it were that easy all the time.
yeah, if only. Oh, that's what Stack Overflow is for.
Right.
Yeah. What other questions?
Just a lot.
Yeah.
I don't have any yet, but I will.
Cool. So doing JSPs in slow motion, we had this, go back to our code that we've been working with before. So we had our web address here, but we're not really doing anything with it. Where's our controller? I'm going to add one. The love to code JSP videos. And I'm going to replace this with an actual link. Copy the link. So this is a YouTube series of how to do a lot of different things with JSPs. This one's included at the end of the document here in Learning Resources. And so let's see if we can get our bookmark manager to turn this into a link for us. So when I add the web address, so that's everything on the controller side. That's the data side. Everything else for the structure was already set up. For the JSP, the simplest thing that I could do, it won't be very pretty, would be to add, I think it was called web address. Yeah, web address. Move in Spring Boot run. So it's kind of ugly, but we got it to show up. What we really want is some HTML. So one of the tricky things with using a markup language like either Thymeleaf or JSP, it's really easy to lose track of, am I coding in HTML right now, or am I coding in a Java expression? Which one am I doing? So I like to start with just bare HTML and then start making it complicated. So what I really want to see is a list item and a hyperlink and then some text. So A is for hyperlink. Okay, and so the text would be the title of the bookmark. And the link target would be the address.
Is your backslash supposed to be after your A? For the your closing
Yeah.
tag?
Yeah, good catch, sorry.
Or like, I was confused.
Yeah, good catch. Yeah, this should be right there. It's another drawback of the autocomplete that you would have in an HTML file. So an HTML file will autocomplete that. IntelliJ doesn't know how to do that for JSP. I think there's a version where if you throw money at the problem, IntelliJ will actually let you download a plugin that does it. Yes, Enterprise Edition is really expensive. So another things to keep in mind for which approach you want to go with is you have to do it by hand, and then I make a lot of rookie mistakes like that because I'm used to that things being auto-completed, and then they don't happen anymore. So this is probably wrong, but let's see what kind of wrong it is. For starters, I got 2 of them. All right. That one's a broken link, because there's nothing there. Yeah. But, and so we got our text, and we got our link. And if we go and open the inspector, we can see we have A for our link, and then we have our text showing up as the text inside that A. So we had a list item that had a link that had text. So that nesting nature of HTML, where you can have things inside of things inside of things. So Unamas here doesn't have a web address. So now we can do really awful things with, now that we've got the basic thing working, we can do some extra dazzle with a standard template library to make some decisions. So we're going to have one version that has the web address and one that doesn't. So in our standard template library, we want to see if test equals bookmarks dot bm dot web address equals null. So if it's null, null, don't include the web address. That is probably not the right syntax. Let's see what kind of horrible, not descriptive error message we get when we try this. Cool.
Ooh, I got that one recently.
There it is. Okay, no tag else defined in tag library. So we're looking for the Java standard template library if else. JSTL. When and otherwise. Yeah, that's pretty clunky.
They're pretty standard.
There is no if else, just if. Okay. Let's do this then. It's not the prettiest thing, but it'll work. So we can choose one. There's other things that we could do, like, to say, would try to break this up. No, I don't think it can be done without one if statement. There's ugly things that we could do with this, like, so that's another way we could do it. It is a little hard to keep track of your expressions. It takes a lot of practice. Give yourself a lot of patience when you're dealing with these standard template library expressions and trying to remember, am I rendering HTML right now or am I doing a Java expression? It takes a lot of practice to remember which one you're doing. So that's one way that'll work. That, to me, it's kind of doing the same thing in 3 pieces. Sometimes a little duplication is okay if it makes it easier to read. So you can do the when otherwise approach with this choose, which is a little gross. You can also just have 2 if statements, and so these are the opposite of each other. So now this one shows up. And it didn't create. I'll check this one in too. So all this code will be checked in. If our AV club worked like we hoped it would, we'll have a recording. And pause these, code along, try to recreate this on your own. So we have a goal set for 2 weeks out to try to do something like this in your own project. So create your Java classes, start small. Start with maybe like the first 5 minutes of the video, get that working, and then kind of unpause and build it out as you go. And maybe, try a little bit of Thymeleaf, a little bit of JSP, and figure out which one is less profanity. Which one makes more sense for you. And hopefully your pages will be far more beautiful than this. Yay,
Lauren had a question.
Oh, yeah.
She wanted to know if are we going to be hard coding or going into our final project, or if it's going to be included. Like our final project.
Hey, Lauren, can you go ahead with your question again? Yeah, we can hear you. Are you talking about how these are hard-coded?
Yes.
There's a lot more to this. Right now we're kind of focusing on the front-end development. We'd like to, in the back end of, or in the later weeks, talk about saving this out to a database. That way all this data will still be there when you restart your program. So these are kind of hard-coded for now, just to simplify what we're doing on the front end, but there will be a database component.
Okay, cool.
Is that what you wanted to know?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, great question. Yeah, we'll add in more Maven dependencies. We'll add in some resources that allow Java to interact with SQL, database language. We'll spend a really fun day that everyone loves installing things. Getting Workbench up and running. And Tony is actually working on like an in-memory database so that we can have a little bit of that persistence with only some of the overhead. So yeah, that should be another really cool part to this, so that next time I deploy this, all of our fun thanks, Heroku. Really. Good time to hang. Next time I restart, there we go. Oh. Okay, it restarted at some point. Every time the application restarts, this is probably Heroku doing it. It's going back to just what I hard-coded, and all of our changes are gone. So once we save them to a database, we won't have that problem. Last thing I wanted to say, when you're working on the Heroku assignments, that whole page is for first-time setup. After you've set it up the first time, this is the page for reuse. So this one command. So push to Git, push to Heroku.
You have to push the Git first, right?
I don't think so.
You only asked because I was trying to push to Heroku and
Uh-huh.
it wasn't doing anything, and then I pushed it to Git, and then it found it in. Or like
Okay.
the GitHub specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I guess you kind of doing that first and then we're doing it.
So yeah, the question was, do we need to push to GitHub first and then Heroku? It depends on the way the branches and tags are set up. It's a complicated answer. The short answer is that if it works, keep doing it.
Okay.
Here's some Slack. Are there more questions?
No.
Any more questions? Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Then you can have it on the recording for Q&A later.
Well, it's a question with my layout. So I was building like CSS grid stuff. There was like different things like fancy fun or whatever. And so I made the layout, and if I like localhost or doing from IntelliJ, my grid works, everything's laid out correctly. When I push it Heroku, it totally doesn't care.
Okay.
So that might be a more in-depth
Yeah.
solution needed.
Yeah.
So,
Let's we'll do that one offline. That probably take a little while to unpack. So let's do that.
that's what I figured.
Yeah. So I think we'll stop our recording.
Okay.
Thanks for doing that.
Sure, no problem.
And don't run away yet, because I got to write down who is here.